Alright, so now it's time to get into the fun part of this website, which is actually coding it. We're going to code this entire website. Now let's go and look at the website we're going to be creating. So let's look at what we have. So we have this entire section from here to here, and this basically has an image of a person typing on a computer. We also have a heading over here that says the Ultimate Web Developer Course, and we also have a button over here. Now, I haven't explicitly shown how to make a button, but if you want to think about it, a button is the same thing as a link, because they do the same thing. They link you to somewhere. So we're going to take a link and we're going to style it up and we're going to make this good looking button. Now this is going to be sectioned off from the rest of the web page. We're going to think about this entire website in sections. So this would be one section. This About Me would be another section. And this What We Will Learn will also be another section. Now what do we do with sections and how do we code sections? Well, we can add a division. A division will allow us to section off the styles that we're going to apply to different parts of the web page. So that's the first thing we're going to be doing when we're coding. Now in this first lesson, I'm going to be showing you how to style this first section, and we're going to call this the header. So let's go ahead and open up Komodo. So we already have our files created. We have the project.html and we have project.css, and we've already linked the CSS to the HTML. So let's go ahead into the body and begin working on the web page. So as I said, we're going to work in sections. Now the first section is going to be called a header. So we're going to add a division. So we're going to do bracket div, and now we want to give this division an identifier so we can go back into our CSS and give this a certain style. Now let's call this identifier ID equals, and we'll call this header. Let's go ahead and close off that division, and let's work inside of this now. So what do we have inside this first section? Well, we have a background image, so we're not going to use the image tag because it's going to be really easy for us to just set a background image. But other than the image, what do we have? We have a heading and we have a link that's going to be styled into a button. So let's go ahead and add that. So we're going to create a heading, so let's call this H2, and we're going to write in what our heading is going to be. So that's going to be the Ultimate Web Developer Course. Alright, now we created the heading. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to add that link. So now we're going to work on this link. Now this is a link that's been styled into a button. So how do we create a link? Well, we're going to use the anchor tag. So we're going to do bracket a href equals. Now we don't know exactly where this is going to go yet. And for us web designers and web developers, if we don't know where something's going to go, but we know we want to link it to somewhere, all we do is we put quotation mark, pound symbol, and that's it. That's basically telling us that, hey, we don't know where this button's going to go yet, but if we do find out later on, we can always put it in place of the pound button, So let's go ahead and close off that anchor tag. Now in between this anchor tag, we want the text that's going to be displayed, and that's going to be click to learn more. So let's go ahead and write that, click to learn more. Now, looking at this right now, as you can see, we have the link that's centered in this entire website, and no matter how we resize it, it's going to stay centered. Now, one of the ways we can center things is through margin and padding, but that's going to be a lot of effort for us. Now, let's think of a way we can center something really quickly and really easily without having to mess with margin and padding, right? Now, what can we think of that centers really easily? Paragraphs. If you can remember, we can center paragraphs by using a declaration called text align, and we can set that value to center. Now that'd be a really easy fix to easily center this button in the middle of the page. Now what we can do is a workaround. We can put this link inside of a paragraph. So outside this link tag, we're going to do a bracket p bracket. Now Komodo's automatically going to generate a closing paragraph tag right next to it. Now we're going to remove that, and we want to end the paragraph at the end of the link. So we're going to do bracket / p bracket. Now what we've done is we've put a paragraph, and inside that paragraph we have a link. Now going back and styling this will become much easier because we can easily center this in the middle of our website. So we have finished off the header. That's how easy creating just this header is. Now let's go ahead and see what we have so far created. So let's go ahead and open up in Google Chrome. Now let's save, preview in this Google Chrome, and look at what we have. So we have a pretty basic Ultimate Web Developer Course heading and a link that says click to learn more. Now let's keep on working with that and start styling this. So we're going to go and head over to our CSS file. Now, the first thing we want to do is mess around with the body. Now, as you can see, this picture extends all the way to the edge of the browser window. Now, this means that we don't have any margin inside this website. So the first thing we want to do is we want to set the margin for this entire website, because this entire website has no margin in it. So let's go ahead and set the body, which is everything that we can see in a website, to 0. So let's go back into Komodo. Let's go to CSS. And now we're going to give the selector body, and we're going to use a curly brace. And now we're going to use a declaration of margin. So we're going to set the margin, and then we're going to write colon. And now we're going to write 0 with a semicolon. So now we're setting the body with a margin of 0. So let's go ahead and save that, and let's keep working on. So the next thing we want to do is mess around with the header. Now, if you don't remember, we created an identifier for the header called header. So let's go ahead and style with that as well. So in order to style identifier, we're going to use a hashtag or a pound symbol. So we're going to do pound header. And now we're going to start styling it with adding a curly brace. Let's give ourselves some room. Now, what do we want to do? Well, first let's start messing around with the size. Now, as you can see, this width of the header extends all the way. So 100% of the width is taken up by this header. So let's go and set the width as 100%. So width is 100% of the screen. Now let's look at the height. The height isn't full all the way to the bottom. Now let's look at the height. The height in some devices will reach the full bottom, but into others it will not. So we're going to set a custom height for this. Now, I've already measured this out, and you can do whatever height you'd like, but for us right now, we're going to set a height to 750 pixels. So we're going to set height as 750 pixels. Alright. Now next up, we're going to add a background image. So this background image is already in our files. So what we can do is we can go to Komodo Edit, and we can assign a background image to this entire header section. So background image, and now we can give this a URL in order to signify where this background image file is going to be. And inside our files, the background image is called back1.png. And then lastly, we exit the parentheses and we give this a semicolon, and now we can move on to the next part. So the next part is going to be a little bit tricky to understand. So we're going to set background size to cover. Now what this does is that it allows us to render and allows us to reshape the size of the picture based on how wide our window is. So as you can see, if I make this window smaller, the picture gets smaller, and it fits the whole entire picture in there without having us to cut off anything, until it gets to a certain point around this area where the picture starts to become cut off. Now, most devices that are being shown on a computer won't have their windows this small. They'll most likely be like this, or they'll most likely be full screen. So we want to ensure that the entire picture shows up in the web page. So we're going to set background size to cover. So let's go and work on the next part. The next part is going to be called overflow, and we're going to set that to hidden. Now by adding overflow hidden, what's going to happen is that anything that shows up past this header that's inside here will be cut off. For example, let's say we had this button over here, and as we were resizing it, the button automatically went down under here. Now we don't want this button to touch any part of this about me. We want it to just cut off. You know, we'd rather have this be not showing than rather than it being covered up and being on top of something else. Now it looks unprofessional if other things are being placed on top of other things. Now we want to eliminate any confusions, and we just want everything to be clean. So if anything comes outside of this box, what will happen is that any overflow past this line will be hidden from the user. So overflow hidden. Now let's go ahead and work on that heading that we have called the Ultimate Web Developer course. So let's go ahead and extend that back up just to see everything in full frame. Let's look at what we have so far. So as you can see, we have our background image implemented, and if we resize this, it will resize as well. So everything's working. Now let's go ahead and work on this heading. So let's go back into Komodo Edit. Now we have a heading over here. Now this heading is a child or a descendant of the division. Now let's go ahead and work on that heading. So what we're going to do is we're going to add another rule. Now we're going to say that the heading is a descendant of the division parent. So we're going to use pound header, which is the parent, and we're going to put a space, and we're going to write the descendant's name, which is H2. Now we can style this by applying a curly brace and giving ourselves some room. And now what do we want to do? Well, what we want to do is we want to set this width of this entire heading to 100% so that it extends all the way from here to here. Now the text won't expand this way, but we want to give this text room to move with. So we want to set the width as 100%. So let's go ahead and add this width to 100%. Next thing we want to do is we want to mess around with the font size. So we want to make this a nice big text. So we're going to create the font size as 80 pixels. Alright, next thing we want to do is we want to use a font family. Now in the previous lesson, I've attached a link tag that will allow us to put custom fonts in there. So opening up that document, as you can see, we have a link tag that I told you to put inside of our style sheet. So let's go ahead and Control C or Command C and copy that and paste that into our HTML. Now we can put this in the head section right under our link tag for the CSS folder. Now all we're going to do is we're going to paste that into our HTML folder, and there we go. We have now linked a Google Fonts website, and now we're going to be taking styles from the Google website. Now this is a custom Google font selection that I've made because I felt like these fonts were really nice looking and very modern. And now by being able to link this inside our HTML, we are now able to take custom fonts rather than just the standard web-safe fonts such as Times New Roman and Arial. So let's go back into our CSS and mess with font family. So for this header, we're going to give this a font family. Now I'm going to choose a font family from that style sheet that we just added, which is over here. We're going to choose one, and this one's going to be called Josephine Sans. So we're going to put quotation mark, and we're going to write Josephine. So Josephine, Sans, Sans, and just as a backup, we're going to write sans serif. So we can put a comma, and we can give this sans serif just in case the browser isn't able to render Josephine Sans, but it should be. So let's go ahead and save that and work on the next part. Now I want this color of the text to be white, so we're going to set color as white. Alright, keeping on. Now we want to give this a margin. Now we don't want this text to show up all the way over here. So if we go back over here and refresh this, as you can see, this text is all the way over here, and it's really kind of too close to this top part right here. We want to give it some space. So what do? We're going to give it some margin. Now we're going to go back into Komodo, and we're going to give this a margin from the top of about 10%. So let's go ahead and give that 10%. Now we also want it to give margin from the bottom. Now we're going to set this to auto. That way the code automatically centers everything, and it centers the top and the bottom, and we're good to go. Now let's work on the last part of the heading, which is centering this text in between left and right. And the easiest way we can do this is through text align, and we'll set that through center. And that is it. We should be done with the heading. Now let's go ahead and take a look at it. And there we go. We are now good with our heading. But wait a minute. Our heading doesn't have that cool font that's over here. That's probably because we didn't save our HTML file. So let's go back and save that. And save. Now if we refresh this over here, we will have that font. So as you can see, it took that Google Fonts website and allowed us to put in our own custom fonts. Alright, now let's work on that link. That link is just right here, it's sitting all lonely, it wants to be styled up. Now let's go ahead and give it some style. So, go back into Komodo, go into CSS, and let's go ahead and write a new rule. So, that link is basically a descendant of the header. So the same way we did descendants for the H2, we'll do the same way for the link. So we'll do pound header, space, and we're going to write the anchor tag. So A. Now we can add that curly brace and begin styling. Now what do we want to do first? Now when styling this button, or this link should I say, this link is an inline element, meaning it's going to show from left to right if we add more links, rather than a block element such as a heading that when you write a new block element, it will go under it. Now, an inline element is really great for us placing things, but the key thing that it doesn't do for us, it doesn't allow us to give anything margin or width. So we want this to be an inline element, but allow us to treat it like it's a block element. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Komodo, and we're going to use a display declaration, and we're going to set this to inline block. Now this will allow us to keep it as an inline, but we're going to be able to treat it like a block element, allowing us to give it margin and allowing us to give it width. So let's go ahead and give that a semicolon, and now let's start giving it margin, something we couldn't do before we added the display declaration. So margin from the top. Now we want to give it spacing from the top of the words, so we want to give it about 100 pixels, which should be enough. Now these are all sizes that I've picked out just through guess and check and trying to find the best positioning of this element. So let's keep on going. Now we want to give this a border radius. Now what a border radius, let's go ahead and find that. So dash radius. And what this does is that if we had this link and we had a color surrounded by it, it would be a square shaped. Now I'm not too big of a fan of a square shaped button, but I prefer the rounded edges such as this one. It looks much more cleaner. So what border radius will do is it'll curve the edges of this button, allowing it to look a lot more smoother and a lot better looking. So we're going to go and give this a border radius of 50 pixels. So 50 pixels, and there we go. Let's keep on moving on. We want to give this a font size, so let's do font size, and we'll give this a 20 pixel font size. Alright, now we want to give this a background color. Now I've chose this green color, which is a custom color. Now I'm going to give you that code for it. So we're going to set background, and we're going to set it as pound. Now copy exactly what I have written down. So it's going to be 57D00B, and then with a semicolon, and that is our background color. Alright, so now we're going to add a little bit of padding in order to separate and give a little bit of space between this text from the left and the top and the right and the bottom. So we can do that. So we can go back to Komodo, and we're going to give this a padding of 15 pixels from the top and the bottom. And now we can add a space and work with the left and the right. So we want to give this a spacing of about 10 pixels on both the left and the right. And that is how we give a padding for both top and bottom and left and right at the same time. We just put a space in between them. Alright, keeping on, we're going to add text decoration. Now, as you can see over here, we have this underline over here. Now, that's because this is a link and it automatically gives us a decoration of an underline for a link. Now, we don't want that to show up. As you can see on our button, it's nice and clean and there's no underline. So, all that is text decoration. We can set that to none. So, no text decoration for this button. Alright, keeping on, we're almost done with this button. We're going to give this a color text of white to keep it clean looking. So, white. And lastly, we want to give this a font family. And it's going to be one of the fonts we chose from our Google Fonts link tag that we applied. And it's going to be called Poiret, so Poiret 1. And then as a backup, we're going to put comma, and we're going to put serif just as a backup. And there we go. We should be good to go. And now if we look at what we have so far and refresh this, there we go. We have everything working so far, but we have one little problem. This thing isn't centered in the page. Now let's go back into our Komodo edit and see what we did. Now remember when we created that link? What did we do to that link? We put it inside a paragraph. Now why did we put it in the paragraph? So that we could center it. Now let's go ahead and center that. So we're going to access it through descendants. So we're going to call this pound header. And now we're going to call the descendant of the header, which is the paragraph. And now we're going to add a style to it. And the only style we're going to add to it is called text align. And we're going to center that with a semicolon. And let's go ahead and see what we have done. And there we go. We have now coded the entire header, and it's looking pretty nice so far. This website is shaping up pretty nicely, and we're getting pretty close to finishing half of it. So we finished off the header, and now in the next lesson I'll be showing you how to work with the About Me page and working on the rest and finalizing this entire website. So see you guys in the next lesson.